So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War, and this is a replay which is actually from the recent tournament that happened among the testing community for Silmarillion, which should be a pretty good benchmark as to where they're going with things, especially with regards to the factions we're going to see, of course, but also it should be a good indicator of the progress that has been made since the first round of Silmarillion replays was done before the start of the new year. So this should be quite interesting. I've made my opinions on the grassy plain pretty clear in the past. I think that as a map, I think its time has passed. I think that it is a little bit dry and boring, even for tournament battles like this. Yes, it's fair to both sides, but it's just so visually unappealing compared to a lot of the good work that developers for all of the various third aid mods have put into maps up until this point. It is also going to be a bit of a mix of all sorts of different factions, so this isn't really a battle with any sort of theme, nor is it a battle which adheres to any sort of lore friendliness, as most of the Silmarillion battles probably will be, considering the overall theme of the mod and the kind of people that it will appeal to. So this is going to be a bit of an outlier among the Silmarillion replays, I think. But as a tournament battle, it also will have a lot of high effort from the players on both sides of the conflict today. And it should be an interesting one, because there are a lot of different philosophies on display, both with regards to players and the armies they've decided to bring. So to start off with the blue team, I've no idea at what stage of the tournament this is. This could be the final for all I know, but I was just given it by J Monster, and I'm going to run with it. So I'm going to assume that it's just a regular game, it's not the final or anything. We can see that Death Eater here is going to be one of the blue team players, and he is going to be playing as Angband, which is the only evil faction which is on display today. So he's going to have access to a little bit more in terms of numbers, but it's not as if Angband have got poor quality either, especially when it comes to their armour. They're actually pretty decent, and obviously their high tier monstrous units, you can see the full array of them in the back, which we'll get onto in a moment. Obviously very, very dangerous if they can get into close quarters and start doing damage quickly. Ironshot Arbalists are going to be a very important supporting tool, however. The grassy plain is a completely flat map, as everyone will know, so angles are going to be important. If you just leave them out in the middle of nowhere, obviously superior elven archers are going to be able to really pick them apart pretty quickly, even with their superior armor values. However, if you move them up with the main army, get them into a good position to shoot and support the infantry, crossbows like this can be an incredibly important tool, and that goes for any medieval 2 variant, whether it's the main game or any of its submods. Crossbows can be so good at doing that. The main line of the Realm of Angband today is going to be made up of Ironshod Legionnaires and Ironshod Halberdiers, which is a good combination. As we've said, polearm units like this, units with access to the phalanx formation, are much rarer in Silmarillion, which does mean that when you do have a unit that you can bring in high quantities like the Ironshod Halberdiers, you aren't going to immediately be countered by a bunch of pikes. So there is the possibility here that they could use their phalanx to a real advantage here against any elves they may perceive on the other side of the field. And obviously the Legionnaires obviously provide that solidity, the shields, and obviously the extra cover that they need, the extra mass. Otherwise, if they get into close quarters and their phalanx is broken, the Halberdiers will do quite poorly. On both flanks, he's gone for the slightly higher tier units, the Spear Guard of the Iron Crown, and in behind, in the last Silmarillion replay, we didn't see these guys in their true form, the Guardians of the Iron Crown with their big maces, heavy armour, and tower shields. So really, really solid on the flanks here. Both of these units are obviously very focused on their armour, their survivability. The AP from the Guardians of the Iron Crown is all well and good as well, but for the most part they're just going to be really tanky units that are going to be on the flanks trying to hold things in place while the main line moves up, and presumably then the monsters will roll through as well. So you can see the Iron Crown units over on the other side as well. The General, going to be part of the Bulldogs of Angband today. This is a placeholder model, it's worth saying. The old model, which had the severed heads on the back and looked very grisly, was really cool, but it also caused some instability in the game, so while that is fixed, a placeholder has been implemented until then. But the Bulldogs, of course, pretty much what you'd expect from a bodyguard melee unit like this. Tough to bring down, but also very, very damaging in their own right. We saw in the last Silmarillion replay, actually, they nearly pulled out a victory for their team, just through sheer strength at arms when both sides were very exhausted, but in the end there just weren't quite enough of them. In this situation, though, things may be different. Then the monstrous units. This is where a lot of the punch from Angband is going to come. The rest of the line is sort of very functional, very able to hold for a certain amount of time, but when it comes to actually overcoming particularly elven opponents, they're going to need a little bit of something extra, but of course these monsters are exactly what you need from that. The Balrogs are going to be obviously very high damage dealers. As with most trolls, they can still be isolated and brought down if you send them in unsupported, but if they are supported, obviously they're going to be really, really dangerous. In addition to that, we have the Troll Guard of Gothmog, so it's almost like Gothmog and his mates have come with their employees to really do some damage today. And the Troll Guard of Gothmog, of course, very heavily armoured trolls, much more along the sort of lines of what we would expect to see from something like Olag High, for example. And then over here, Uroloki. The flaming breath they have, which is not too dissimilar visually from the Witchers, is nowhere near as devastating as that, as anyone who's watched Silmarillion up to this point will know. Against lightly armoured troops it can be, as long as the blob is close enough, and they are still a potentially really devastating unit, especially considering the fact they are, you know, monstrous, effectively cavalry in their own right. So a very multifaceted unit here, and against lightly armoured opponents they can be really, really useful. Death Eater's ally today is going to be Misericordi, or Misericordi. Misericordi. Yeah, again, that name always trips me up. I'm no good with French-like pronunciations. House of Feanor, though, which is an interesting accompaniment, obviously far more quality-focused than any Orc faction will be, although they do still have these human units which they can use to pad out their numbers, as we've seen in the past, the Shield Bearers of Helleborn, which are very functional spearmen for the front line. They're able to hold. They're nothing too special, they're not going to get tons and tons of kills, they're going to be easily overwhelmed by higher quality infantry from other factions, but as an accompaniment to their more pricey and better elves, they can really work out quite well, I think. And they also have a ballista with the ballista crew here, which of course acts as nice infantry as well. They're going to be taking pot shots at one another from across the field. Just in behind we can see the footmen of Amras, which do have the armour upgrade, I believe, which obviously very, very effective units of line infantry indeed, heavily armoured, really, really good when things get up close and personal, and this is where the House of Feanor really shine. Heavy cavalry especially, but also their heavy elven infantry, which are a little bit more focused around their damage that they can deal, because it's mostly line infantry, and just in behind you can see the upgraded defenders of Aglon, which are the heavy swordsmen as well. So a good combination here, not very many of them, but if you combine them with the numbers that Angband have brought today, it could be a really potent combination if they can organise it correctly. And then the Otorn Maitimo, which are the bodyguard unit over here, again similar to what the Bulldogs will offer for Angband, only of course the elven flavour with the crimson armour, which is not too dissimilar to what we've seen from Imladris in the past. And then over here, a huge amount of the investment has of course gone into the House of Feanor's heavy cavalry, which is the main strength of the faction at the moment, because no one can really match the amount of heavy cavalry Feanor can put on the field. You can see the mounted company of Finarfin are over here, which are the javelin cavalry, which are really, really useful for cementing the cavalry advantage that the House of Feanor already have, because of course Javcav is really, really useful at bringing down enemy riders. Can also be good at dealing damage to enemy infantry as well. This guy, he just, you know, he doesn't care what's going on at the moment. He is just the ultimate Chad, and you can see the mounted company of Finarfin can be used against enemy infantry, but of course, you know, they don't have that much range, so you do need to be careful of enemy archers. Further down the line, we can see the mounted company of Caligorn, which are lancers, heavy lancers. This is the kind of unit which can do devastating amounts of damage if you allow it to. A couple of units of them, and then finally, of course, we have the knights. We have the Roqueni Magloro, which we all know what knights is capable of. The special thing about these guys, though, of course, is the fact that no other faction in the game really has an equivalent to what the Roqueni can do. There are other units of high-tier heavy cavalry available, but none of them are really lance knights in the way that the Roqueni are, and this is obviously one of the main strengths, because we know how devastating knights can be. And now as we move over here, I mean, you can tell this is a tournament, because I don't think this would fly under normal circumstances, but here, I mean, we have two units of the House of Finarfin, and to be fair, the House of Finarfin, when it comes to making nice, neat formations like this is pretty much what they're best at, because in comparison to the House of Feanor, they have got heavy infantry on their mind, well, heavy defensive infantry on their mind, mainly with regards to their spears and their pikes, so it makes sense they're going for a tighter formation. I mean, it is a very neat formation, this. They're near the red line of the map, they've deployed their stakes in behind, so they intend, obviously, to dig in and not allow themselves to be overwhelmed, which, to be fair, I mean, some people might look on this and think, well, I mean, they're new boxing it up here. To a certain extent, this is correct, but I feel as though this is probably the right way to go about things, because if they go out into the middle of the map, they are going to be putting themselves up against potentially being overwhelmed by Angband's infantry and gaps appearing for the House of Feanor's cavalry, which of course could be devastating, and as soon as that starts to happen, of course, the battle's already lost. So to try and keep your cohesion here is going to be absolutely imperative. You can see Celtic is over here as one of the effectively defenders, and FFA Muffins, the other player. So, over here, we can see that they're probably mostly going to have brought mostly the same sort of things, so I'll blend their two army compositions together. We've got the Wardens of Nargothrond and the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond, so two of the higher tier units. The pikes obviously really, really useful. They will be able to keep those halberdiers at bay. They won't be here in as high numbers as the halberdiers, but as long as they keep their formation tight, the House of Finarfin, it won't matter too much. And obviously, heavy spearmen in the Wardens of Nargothrond to back them up. More Wardens of Nargothrond on the flanks. The Sartor Finderato, which of course is the infantry bodyguard unit that the House of Finarfin have available to them. Obviously, they are spearmen in comparison to the Otorn's swords, so they won't be quite as good at dealing damage to other units of infantry, but they will be even tougher to bring down. Think along the lines of something like the Gwaith-e, not Myrdain, what are they? God, do you think I'd recognise the name? But the heavy Imladra spears in Reforged. Swordsman of Talathirin, javelin combined with line infantry. Very nice combination that, because obviously not much ammunition from these guys, but they will do some damage, and then they'll get into melee and really help shore things up on the front line. And they do pull out their swords as well, so they're not subject to the same malice that many of Finarfin's units are, because many of them are spearmen, of course. Archers of Talathirin and the Marksmen of Nargothrond at the back. Marksmen of Nargothrond, of course, with their split shots could do devastating damage on the approach. And then the Archers of Talathirin are also no slouches, being elven archers. But the main purpose behind these guys, of course, is to put their stakes at the back to prevent the cavalry from cycling around. Over here, we have the Arqueni Mormagilwa, which this is a really, really strong unit because it's a bodyguard unit of heavy swordsmen. And obviously, again, units like this tend to be quite unique in the game, especially as it stands, with few factions fully implemented. So the Arqueni Mormagilwa will be able to do a ton of damage in melee, which is, again, somewhat unique. Considering Finarfin's overall focus on being a little bit more defensive with pikes, spears, and forming up a strong front line, as we can see. More Wardens of Nargothrond there. I imagine it's going to be pretty similar. There's 2 ballistas as well, so they're definitely intent on forcing the enemy to come to them, as if that wasn't already immediately apparent from their deployment. Swordsmen of Talathirin and Wardens of Nargothrond. Again, we can see the Arqueni. Archers of Talathirin at the back, a block of Wardens of Nargothrond and Bridge Wards. The Sartor Finderato more central in Muffins' army. And then over here, swordsmen, wardens, and then more archers at the back. A lot of archers, a lot of spears, obviously a lot of solidity, but will they be able to keep that in the face of an assault? So without further ado, let's begin. So, it's going to be quite clear here that the red team definitely going to be out here trying to pitch their tents, but will this work out? I mean, ooh, not ×2 speed. I thought they were moving a little bit quickly and erratically there. Archers of Talathirin and going to move forward, so going to probe the lines with a couple of units of archers first and foremost. So I mean, the red team's idea here is fairly simple, and they have the means to do this as well. The fact that they have gone ahead and brought 2 units of artillery, the ballista, means that the 1 unit of artillery that the House of Feanor have brought is probably not going to be sufficient to dislodge them. And even then, even if it was, they could just shimmy their formation forward a little bit and then use their archers. So the House of Finarfin are going to be able to halt this formation, and there's not really a lot that the blue team are going to be able to do about that if they wanted to turn this into a slightly longer battle and be a little bit more conservative. I don't think that's what the blue team had in mind anyway, based on the compositions they have. You can see there the trolls knocking over their own men, but really in terms of ranged units, they only have javelin, cavalry and crossbows, which are obviously going to be lower range than the archers they were inevitably going to be facing anyway. So I do actually believe that the blue team's plan probably won't have changed all that much. They definitely have more of an aggressive look to their army anyway. I think the real key behind this battle, however, is going to be this clump of units over here. Yes, Angband's monsters are obviously going to play a huge role, and exactly how they are used is going to be key. But Feanor have invested so much into this cavalry that they cannot afford to have it not be useful. Like, it's a lot of the florins that Feanor had available to them bound up in these 5 units over here, so they're going to need to use them well. At least a couple of the units need to be used effectively, and that is going to be difficult. I think you need to, it's all about timing here for the blue team. What the blue team's going to need to do, I think, is engage from the front, wait for a few gaps to appear, and then slam in with the monsters and the cavalry quickly and try and deal a lot of damage all at once. Because the longer the fight goes, the grindier it becomes. I think Finarfin will be quite happy with that. I mean, it's definitely their forte. We saw in the last battle they held the river crossings extremely well with their front lines. But from Finarfin's perspective as well, they do need to keep their formations, because as soon as their formations start to lose cohesion and gaps start to appear, that's when disaster is bound to strike. And it's also interesting, obviously, the 3 artillery pieces for the House of Feanor trundling forwards. It would be interesting. I mean, the ballista, the first thing they're going to have to try and do is snipe out the enemy artillery. I don't think they have much of a choice of doing otherwise. I mean, in an ideal world, I think this ballista would probably be best used, honestly, against maybe the central formations, like back here, the Wardens of Nargothrond and the Bridge Wards. The Bridge Wards, honestly, one of the more awkward units that the blue team are going to have to try and deal with here. You could try and use the monsters on them, and that would be effective. But if you send the monsters in all alone, they're going to struggle a little bit, I think. Here. Yeah, you can see now the 4 ballistas, actually, from the House of Finarfin going to move forward, and it's going to be an artillery duel to start. Of course, Finarfin also have the good foresight to have brought a lot of skirmishers as well. So they're going to be able to really shore up their range position. I mean, again, it's all going to be a matter of timing. I think there's going to be unavoidable losses here on the approach for Angband and for Feanor. But I mean, certainly from Angband's perspective, you can afford to be a little bit more wasteful. And to be fair, I mean, perfectly capable. The only unit that I would say is uniquely vulnerable in this situation would be the Halberdiers, because they don't have a shield. But everything else, maybe the Arbalists as well. But I mean, these monstrous units, so many hit points. Obviously, they're a little bit more spread out as well with fewer unit models, so they're actually going to be harder to hit, even for elves, ironically, considering the massive size of the Balrogs. And then the Uroloki back there as well. I mean, interesting to see what the Uroloki can do in the preamble to this fight, because a lot of Finarfin's units are decently armoured. I mean, the Talath-Dirnin units are sort of average with regards to their armour, I would suggest. But the Nargothrond units and upwards, the heavier Finarfin units, definitely should be quite resilient against the Uroloki fire, to be honest with you. Can still be effective against larger blobs, even against heavily armoured troops, because you'll still be able to do a decent amount of damage with that, but even still. I can see, I think, what Death Eater wants to do. I mean, he's leading with his monsters because they're going to be more resilient to the arrow fire, but he does also need to be careful, because if he goes right in to the jaws of the ballista, the ballista's going to be an instant kill if it hits, even on a Balrog. So, you do need to be very careful here. It is a puzzle that the blue team have to be the ones to solve. I mean, personally, I am more inclined to look favourably upon teams that have a more aggressive mindset, sort of less conservative, want to get stuck in. So, I'm not going to be entirely neutral here. I do kind of want the blue team to win, because it's hard to, while it is a very neat looking formation, there's no getting around the fact that it is pretty boxy, and it is obviously deploying right up against the back red line in any Total War as a bit of a Total War multiplayer game is a bit of a faux pas. Your opponents probably won't look too favourably on you if you do such a thing. I'm not entirely sure what's going on here. The ballista crew appears to be leading the way. They need to be a little bit careful here, otherwise if they start firing on a whim, they're going to carve through their own number. Another ballista coming over here. So yeah, definitely you can see, interestingly, they're going to try and double up on the House of Feanor's ballista, it would appear. And House of Feanor actually able to get the first volley off, which could be fairly key. It's not going to matter in the long run, of course, because these ballistas will be able to win for the House of Finarfin. There's more of them, and numbers are... quantity is a quality all of its own. But it is interesting. I think, you know, Muffins, it could have been quite tempting to try and use their ballistas over on that side on the monstrous units from Angband. There we go. So none... oh yeah, one of the Feanor bolts did actually hit. So one ballista down over here. None of the ballistas down over here. Actually, interestingly enough, it managed to sort of presumably take the head off this poor engineer here. But none of the actual ballistae fell by the wayside there. So the House of Feanor doing very well for themselves. A miss once again, however, as the bolts whiz by. Have a feeling this is going to be one of those battles where the blue team spend a decent proportion of the time sort of preparing their assault, and then everything's going to happen pretty quickly. Oof, they're just falling short. One of the House of Feanor's ballistas does go down. I mean, really, anything they can get here is going to be a bit of a bonus, I would suggest. They'll hope to get more than one. I think with the good start they received, I think they would hope to maybe bring down one of the enemy ballistae. This is risky though. You can see just in the background over there, obviously still trading fire, but not a huge... well, the Arqueni are on the way over now, and there's also arrows thudding into the heavy plate armour of the Troll Guard of Gothmog. The ballista crew is also running away. They need to be careful here, because troll type units like this, time and time again, we've seen them come unstuck against really strong units of aggressive infantry, and that's definitely what the Arqueni Mormagilwa are. So they need to steer well clear of them. The Troll Guard are strong enough and it's one of those interesting battles that might be. Celtic, though, maybe a little bit slow on the draw there. He could have rolled some of his infantry units forwards a little bit. Again, I don't really feel as though this is going to be all that of a decisive engagement, if I'm being brutally honest. Like, you're not going to be able to kill the ballista crew off in their entirety. You're not even going to be able to win the artillery duel, if I'm being brutally honest. Celtic, he's not eager to come forward, is he, Celtic? He really wants to maintain his position, which is completely understandable, I think, over here because of all of the cavalry, which is now actually moving behind the House of Feanor. And they're doing the right thing here. You can see they're splitting up. They're not advancing face-on to the formations that Finarfin put up, which does mean the blue team are going to have to pivot their defence, at least partially, to meet the challenge of the now flanking armies. Meanwhile, Muffins' unit of Arqueni more McGill. I'd be really surprised if this troll gets out of here with both units of Arqueni now nearby. Still, decent amount of damage. I mean, the ballista crew, they're actually decent in melee in their own right, so I mean, killing them off is not a complete waste. Look at this. The finest elven warriors dealing with this one troll. And there he goes. And you can see Death Eater still just hovering around with his troll guard, making it difficult. I mean, to be fair, I mean, this ballista over here was pulled back manually. The other one was temporarily abandoned. And it's actually interesting. Ooh, you need to be real careful here. Muffins is chasing them a long way with his Arqueni, and he's getting far enough away from his support that it might be a little bit dicey if the cavalry decided to swing in. I think fortunately for him, the cavalry is sort of doing its own thing for the time being and still busy being set up, but need to be careful of that. And it's a good thing the House of Feanor didn't bring any of their archers either. So going for the sort of fully aggressive focused army does mean that you can't take advantage of stuff like that when they would otherwise be in range of archers. While Angband's army over here getting ready to mount its assault. House of Finarfin getting their archers talented into a bit more of a traditional formation now, with the archers initially at the front in loose formation, the army just in behind ready to roll forwards when Angband decides to engage. Ballista coming back over here from Muffins now, which I think is the right call now that Angband is closer. I think it would be pretty advantageous to start firing. I think you're going to get a little bit of friendly fire. Yeah, maybe not. This guy's in a bit of danger. But taking a few pot shots into the Angband army to maybe harry the blue team a little bit, maybe make them panic. Because at this point the blue team are just able to sort of leisurely take their time, set up the ideal assault for themselves. Of course, the other side of that particular coin is the fact that it's very obvious to see when and what they're actually doing. So at some point the blue team will need to start to kick it into high gear, start to move with a little bit more intent. As soon as they're in range of the archers, I would suggest is when that needs to happen, because if they linger too long in all of the archers' range, they're going to be in trouble. But if you close up quickly, all of the archers will suddenly then become a little bit more of a liability. Elven archers can defend themselves in melee, but they would much rather utilise their bows first and foremost. You can see here the ballista. Oh, that was a really good shot there. Right through the Iron Crown units. The Iron Crown units obviously normally so resilient to ranged attacks with their big shields and their thick armour, but on this occasion they got a little bit too bunched up there. There's always an element of fortune with most artillery pieces. Ballistas, though, there is a certain amount of reliability with them that you don't get with the others, I suppose, but still, Death Eater blobbed up his units a little bit too much there. Still walking them as well at that time. Different now. Ironshot Arbalists now in range. I mean, they're going to try and skirmish here with the House of Finarfin. I'm not entirely sure I agree with that. I think the main strength behind bringing such an aggressive force would probably be to close up quickly. Your own troops could get in the way of the bolts, though, so I suppose there are two sides to that argument, and we'll only really see which one is right by the outcome of this battle, really, because personally what I would want to do is deny the House of Finarfin the free use of their archers. That's a little bit unfortunate there. The Swordsmen of Talathin and taking free shots. Their shields won't help too much against crossbow bolts either. Crossbow bolts are very, very deadly, of course. They're going to move forward a little bit more so now. Warns of Nargotha, and there has been damage done. I mean, obviously crossbows can be really, really vicious. Trying to soften them up for the main assault. In comes the ballista once again, trying to go after the Iron Crown units. Succeeding as well. Good shots, good hits. None of these hits have been particularly devastating. Well, one of them was actually particularly devastating, but ballistas don't do match-winning levels of damage in a single shot in the same way that maybe a trebuchet could. But this is really adding up at this point, because the Iron Crown infantry is by far and away the toughest that Angband have. I mean, the monsters are all well and good, but if you lose too many of these guys, then stuff like the Nargothrond units are going to be far too comfortable against the Iron Shots. Forward come the Swordsmen of Talat Din in to try and get the Iron Shot Arbalists to stop firing. I mean, yes, this skirmish, I would say, is... Angband won't be too displeased with the initial... Excuse me. That's what comes from talking too much. Sudden catch in the throat. But as I was saying, I think the issue is like the initial performances here of the Iron Shot Arbalists were all well and good, but the skirmish ever since has definitely gone in favour of the House of Finarfin, and this is what I was kind of concerned about. They've got so many archers that they can bring to bear here, and they haven't even used their split shots yet, which I think is fairly telling. The fact that Finarfin still feel comfortable enough here to not dump all of their ammunition all at once. They feel that they can still ration it in spite of the fact that the pressure is only going to be building from here. And part of the issue here, I think, is the blue team cannot afford to skirmish here, I don't think. Like, because the army from the House of Feanor is unable to support this kind of skirmish fight that Angband is engaging in at the moment. Which of course means, you know, most of the basic archers in the House of Finarfin can focus their entire attention on Angband. They don't need to worry for the time being about the House of Feanor, whereas if both factions had collapsed in all at once and attacked from both sides, I feel as though that probably would have been the better thing to do, because you could still find gaps for the crossbows by doing that, but you would also be denying the archers a nice skirmish fight, which they obviously won. So I think the House of Finarfin will be all too pleased with this so far. Arrows coming in. This looks a little bit more like it. Now you can see the assault is beginning, so a unified attack. I think this is the right thing to do. Time will tell whether that has proven to be a little bit too long in the making. You can see actually that the army has shifted over here a little bit, so the House of Feanor actually has further to go before they will actually be able to engage, which could prove to be very, very important, because Angband, once again, is going to be taking the brunt of the initial damage. I mean, the Swordsmen of Talat Din in here, getting some javelins off. The Iron Crown units, already slightly damaged by the ballista shots, are now going to have to deal with some of these elven infantrymen, who, to be fair, also took some hits from the bolts of the Iron Shot Arbalists, who are still going to try and offer some support, but they're very depleted at this point. It'll be interesting to see if the Iron Shots can also withstand them, or sort of keep their morale in good order. I think it's actually a good opportunity to go into half speed here. Nargothrond units over here in the middle as well. It's interesting actually, the Nargothrond units are going up where the Iron Shots are attacking. Nargothrond units should be more than sufficient to deal with basic Iron Shots like Legionnaires. I mean, the addition of the Phalanx might be an interesting wrinkle there, but you can see the Halberdiers are definitely one of the targets here of the bows. Here come the split shot arrows going after the Javelin Cavalry, which we did see a bit of a volley coming in from the Jav Cav there. Swordsmen of Talat Din in, presumably trying to use their javelins as well, but you can see the Troll Guard of Gothmog and the Balrogs coming in. Arrows and javelins being thrown back and forth now, so the initial volleys Finarfin was able to get off just on their own without any sort of opposition. Now that is proving to be somewhat different, and this is where going defensive can be an example of you digging your own grave, because now we'll see if Finarfin are going to be able to withstand this pressure, because now there's going to be attacks coming in from multiple sides, and it's all going to be about judgment here from the House of Finarfin. Are they going to be able to utilise their resources effectively? Like, there is a case for saying that, you know, Shield Bearers of Helavorn, it's not worth using javelins on, but at this point in time, with so much happening all at once, you just need to try and use your resources as best you can, given the time you have available. So under normal circumstances, if you could pick, you obviously would be using your javelins on something other than the shield bearers here, but these shield bearers are being devastated. The rest of the Feanor army is lagging behind a little bit, and I would suggest they do need to be a little bit more active in pursuing this line, because Angband are getting in here. The cavalry is all over there, but a unified full assault, I think, is how the blue team win this, because it will be quite difficult, I think, for them, the red team, to cover all their bases. In come the bridge wards. You can see here the Iron Shot Legionnaires have been joined by the Halberdiers on the front line now, but in response to that, the Finarfin pikes have also arrived on the front line. So yeah, you can see over here, this is where I would worry for Angband's assault. Swordsmen of Talat Din and able to worm their way through gaps that have already appeared in the lines. And what's left of the Ironshod Arbalists here are going to be wide open to this assault from the infantry. To be fair, over here though, Guardians of the Iron Crown maybe getting a little bit far ahead of themselves there, the Swordsmen of Talat Din, because this front line could buckle. Warns of Nargothrond though, like, this is the strength of the House of Finarfin. Even in fights where they're going to lose, they're still going to be able to hold for an extended period of time because of how good their defensive infantry is. You can see here they're trying to worm their way through the lines here, but I'm not sure to what purpose, because honestly if you stay behind the enemy troops, the crossbows are not really going to be able to get much in the way of shots off on you. So it might be better to actually keep your shape here, and this could prove to be a bit of ill discipline, especially when you consider there's cavalry roaming around out here. So if you leave the strength of, or the sort of relatively strong position of your defensive lines with your spears and such, the heavy lancers from Feanor could make your day very miserable indeed. Marksmen of Nargothrond, to be fair, like we've seen split shot projectiles in this battle, and we are continuing to see them, but some of the units have been engaged in melee by the Troll Guard, by the Balrogs. You can see here the Uraloki are getting in here as well. They're not actually using their flaming breath, which is not necessarily the worst thing. Just getting in here and being a juggernaut on the front line might actually be better in this situation, because you can see actually the front line is starting to fall apart. The Iron Shods are really taking a beating at the hands of these archers at this point, the archers that are still firing. The Trolls and the Balrogs are doing their best to sort of cover all of them, but they can only do so much work, and I still feel as though Misericordi's army here is lagging behind just a little bit too much. He's organising his troops well enough, but he's just not being quick enough, and I feel as though Death Eater's army is ultimately going to be the one to pay the price for that here. He's doing a very good job here. I mean, he's running a lot of interference, he's making the fight messy, which is always what the Orcs are going to want against an Elven faction, but it's going to be difficult here, I think, for him to continue this, because the Elven quality will ring true eventually. The fact that large proportions of his Halberdier line have already broken is going to be a risky one, because the less infantry he has on the front line, the more infantry is going to be able to turn around and try and mob on top of these Troll Guard and Balrogs. So I think it's time we went up to 1 speed again. And the split shots, I mean, the more Trolls and Balrogs fall, the more of these split shot projectiles are going to be able to be trained onto the enemy once again. There is, of course, still, I mean, now the Feanor blob does come in. It's a little bit too blobbed up for me, though, because that's going to allow Finarfin to actually partially wrap around on Feanor's army. It's a lot of strength up front, but as I said, even though Feanor is likely to win this fight, the strength of Finarfin is going to be their ability to hold the line even in a fight they're losing. And ultimately, unless they can break through here more quickly than they're currently doing, I would worry for them. Meanwhile, Uraloki doing some damage here. You can see they are hitting the Swordsmen of Talat Din, which, to be fair, are probably the most vulnerable to the Uraloki breath of all of the Finarfin units. They have decent armour, but it's not as strong as the Nargothrons elsewhere. Archers at this point running out of ammunition, just being committed to the front line. Again, that can be seen as desperate measures, but Elven archers capable in melee. It's a lot of Iron Crown units though. I mean, again, a bit too blobby for my liking. Maybe try and wrap around the lines a little bit more. It's here in the middle though, like where the Iron Shods were, they got cleaned up by the Wardens and Bridge Wards of Nargothrond. I mean, really the only example of a unit that's still holding their own in here is going to be the Bulldogs of Angband, which is not too surprising. It's the best standard infantry unit Angband can bring. Oof. I mean, this is risky though. I mean, now the gap has appeared. Patience from the cavalry, like, as much as I was saying, oh dear, that blood spray, that's a lot of damage there, but I mean, the heavy armour has saved them to a certain extent. My criticism of Misericordi's play was only really with regards to his infantry. He has done exactly the right thing with his cavalry, waiting for the opportunity, waiting for the gap to appear. And perhaps that is the rationale behind this blob over here. Maybe he was hoping. I mean, I don't think Finarfin could have held this whole stretch anyway. So the fact that the gap has appeared is going to allow these knights to come in, and this is going to be the key moment of the fight now. I think these lance cavalrymen need to be used effectively, and that's easier said than done against the House of Finarfin because of all their heavy spears, the presence of the pikes, the Uraloki really making a nuisance of themselves, doing damage. There's a lot of Bridge Wards in here still. Some of the Halberdiers have regrouped, but they're going to be engaged by Marksmen of Nargothrond. Up along the lines, Sartor Finderato holding the line. even fight. I mean, over here, this is a lot of Feanor's infantry that Finarfin is still going to have to deal with. There are still pikes on the line, though. And this is what I mean. I mean, this relative strength, I think, of the infantry is not too dissimilar to one another at this point. There's still Balrogs and Trolls, but they're mostly gone. I think that was a Finarfin general, you know. Just based on the fact, yeah, I mean, the Arqueni were in there, and they took a lot of damage as well. They were sticking out. And at this point, this heavy cavalry is going to be quite hard to stop because they still have to engage from the front against infantry. Oof. Once again, you can see the split shots getting free, trying to deal with the heavy cavalry, but the heavy cavalry is armoured and shielded enough to where even projectiles as strong as that are going to take a little while to have the desired effect. They are falling though, the cavalry, and they're actually wavering at this point. They cannot afford to lose this cavalry, I don't think. I think the Roqueni especially, but the support the Roqueni have from the Mounted Company of Caligor. I mean, this is the problem behind these lances. You need to keep them moving because all of the units they're going to be charging into pretty much at this point are going to be heavy swordsmen, spears or pikes, which are going to do devastating damage to varying degrees in melee, even against heavier cavalry like this. Over here on the flanks, I think the Iron Crown units are just about going to be able to outlast. I think the support of the Uraloki was a bit of a turning point over here, and Angband are going to be able to win a somewhat Pyrrhic victory over on this flank. But how are they doing in the middle? The Uraloki, even against the heavier armour here, because they haven't really had, up until this point, anything hounding them, they've been able to freely shoot their fiery breath into their opponents, and that has had a good effect. And in the middle as well, I think Angband at this point, they are steadily winning on the front line, so the charges have had the desired effect. And I think actually the blue team in the ascendancy here, and the other side to the coin, of course, of Finarfin being able to hold on in a fight that they are ultimately losing, is that if it comes down to sheer melee might, especially against the House of Feanor, the more defensive nature of their units means they're probably not going to be able to kill off the enemy infantry quickly enough to be able to pull out the win. They're still trying to use their split shots here, doing a good amount of damage as well into the Feanor footmen. What about the cavalry though? I think the cavalry at this point is mostly gone, and it is. The cavalry has been mostly dealt with at this point, but the damage is already done. Following in from the disruption that the Trolls and the Balrogs caused, I think maybe Wards of Nargothrond still holding on, Bridge Wards of Nargothrond still holding on. It's still a close fight. It could still go either way here. Arqueni, Morma, Gilbert on the front line. Only 8 of them remaining though. 32 from Celtics, but Muffins' General's Bodyguard got charged by the cavalry when it was still more operational than it currently is, but smaller units like this, the kills can still add up, especially if the charges aren't met with any sort of resistance like that. Just look at this, I mean, Angband at this point, their Iron Crown units doing a good job on the front line. They're being supported now by Feanor's infantry, so they're going to be able to wrap up here. I think the amount of Feanor infantry is going to be really, really tough for Finarfin to deal with at this point. They're going to try and patch things up with the Wards of Nargothrond. They still have some bridge wards, but the resistance and reinforcements they're going to be able to put up from here on out is going to be more sporadic, I think, whereas I think Feanor just has a little bit too much left. The Iron Crown units as well are going to be able to add their own resilience to the front line, we'll call it. Another shot from the Uraloki going into the Arqueni as well. Only 3 of them dying from the breath, but still. Finally, I mean, I honestly think the Uraloki could have been one of the deciding factors in this battle as well, because they were able to really help out over on this flank, where initially things were going really poorly actually for Angband. The Uraloki, the monstrous units from Angband, and the heavy cavalry from the House of Feanor have definitely proven to be very decisive in this battle. And that's exactly what you would expect, considering the strength of both factions. Marksman shooting into the back here. You can see here the footmen of Amras getting an almost complete surround on the marksmen of Nargothrond, who are going to be able to put up a very good fight, of course. Heavy Elven archers often can. But it's going to be a bruising encounter for them, and I think the ball is very much in the House of Finarfin's court at this point, because their position has ultimately been overrun. And when you engage in these kind of tactics and your position is overrun, it's going to be an uncomfortable battle for you. Over here they are winning, and the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond are going to be a big part of that. Obviously their pikes, you can see over here, the Spear Guard of the Iron Crown just finishing off these wardens. Archers of Talat Dirnin could get in the way. Another general falls. That, I think, was actually the House of Feanor's general, because that was the Otorn that we saw there. Wardens of Nargothrond coming in. Archers of Talat Dirnin coming in. These Spear Guard are going to come in behind. I mean, I think Finarfin are going to win over here, especially with some rear charging from the Wardens, but the Spear Guard are going to make things a little bit more awkward. The House of Feanor are going to win over here as well, yeah. Especially, that might be key, actually. That, I think, is going to be the finishing blow. Finarfin needed to hold on over here for longer than they ultimately did. There goes Angband's general. But the Uroloki, once again, I think as a single unit, the Uroloki have been very important here. I think they just ran out of ammunition and they're charging in, but yeah, I think with that, I think the final chances of the red team there have just gone up in smoke. Green smoke at that. Still pinging a few of the split shot arrows in, but ultimately it's not going to matter too much. A big charge coming in there, and this is obviously, again, the multifaceted nature of the Uroloki. Several of those guys will get back up. Still a good charge. They look a little bit awkward when they're running around, but I guess that's to be expected when you have 5 heads. Ergonomically, I think it must be a little bit uncomfortable to be an Uroloki. Let's see what's happening over here, shall we? Yeah, I mean, Finarfin are holding on, but holding on is the key word here, I think. And like I said, when you're in this position with your back to the wall, you're going to need something damaging to get you out of it. And I think all of what Finarfin have left at this point are units which are more comfortable at being defensive. Sartor Finderato still just about alive. They still have Bridgewater of Nargothrond in decent numbers, but pikes are going to be... you can see Shield Bearers of Halavorn trying to escape melee over there. Defenders of Aglon. Yeah, I mean, pikes, obviously, if they're fighting from one direction, they can be real world beaters. But if they're having to fight from multiple directions, it's going to be hard on them. In come the Uroloki, just barreling through the lines. They could end up dying there, because, yeah, they do. But they have proven to be a real thorn in the side. Caused enough disruption there. Uroloki, in sustained melee like that, clearly, they are still strong, but they're not as strong as something like the Balrogs or the Trolls. To be expected, though, when you consider the... there still are Quenny more McGilwa over here, you know. And there's still... I mean, they still haven't fully dealt with the Marksman of Nargothrond. I mean, the Uroloki could have stayed over there and cycle charged them to death. The fact they still have ammunition could turn this battle on its head once more. I think it's going to be hard. I think it's... I mean, there's still 51 Otorn, there's still a lot of Feanor's units over here. Some Arqueni moving in. I mean, Finarfin, like I said, they are capable of holding on for a decent amount of time. I think they can see a couple of Bulldogs heading over to the Marksman. If the Marksman just ran out of ammunition, and I think they did, then I don't think it's going to matter too much in the long run. But a really close battle, again, twists and turns. Both sides really could have won it at any point, I think, and still could. I think that it's beyond the red team now. I'd be really surprised if they were to pull this out, because the pikes, they can't really get set, and there aren't really enough of the Arqueni in relation to some of the other high tier units. In come the Defenders of Aglon. A dedicated heavy swordsman against a makeshift one here is going to result in, well, exactly the result you would expect. Yeah. I mean, I think every faction here has got very clearly displayed their strengths. The heavy cavalry from Masiri Cordy was used at a very opportune moment and proved its worth immensely, because at that point Finarfin were looking pretty comfortable. They still had to deal with the chaos that Angband was causing, but I think without those heavy cavalrymen getting in behind, they would have been able to outlast the Angband pressure. I think Angband's monsters, the chaos they caused, was very important though. Because if they allowed Finarfin to stay comfortable, again, that's another factor that would have allowed Finarfin's more defensive plan to work. But Finarfin's defence was good. I mean, even in the moments where they were really on the back foot, they were able to hold long enough to give themselves opportunities to get themselves out. And in the end, I think that the damage that they were dealt was just a little bit too much for them to overcome, but they still did a very good job, to be fair, at holding their ground for a long period of time. But this also comes back to an overall thing that I would say. I mean, well done to the blue team, first and foremost. But it does come back to something that I would say is more of a general thing, which if you go for a very defensive mindset like this, yes, it's something that Finarfin are obviously going to be very good at. But if you give yourselves no options, and I feel as though what their plan was very one-dimensional here, the House of Finarfin, if it starts to go against you, it can be quite difficult to get out of it. And they were sort of struggling to get out of it, and occasionally it looked like maybe they're going to be able to make it. But in the end, they were hemmed into a defensive position that if they left, the cavalry would have hunted them down. If they stayed, then we saw the Uroloki do incredibly well in this fight. They obviously racked up a very impressive kill count. But, I mean, the House of Finarfin, what sort of options would they have had to not do that? I feel as though maybe trying to be a little bit wider, maybe giving their archers a little bit more room. I can see why they did what they did. I think it was just a case of sort of the finer details of their defence, which ultimately was found a little bit wanting. And I think that ultimately came down to the fact that they had to twist their defensive formation to defend from two opposite sides rather than one unified assault from the front, which is, again, credit to the blue team because, unthinkingly charging into the front of that defence with the pikes and spears all set up nicely, archers able to really focus them down on the approach. It would have been a bloodbath for them. But they avoided that. They pulled Finarfin out of an ideal position for them, and then they slowly but surely they were able to go in. It could have been different. Like again, the assault wasn't fully unified, and that could have cost them. But in the end, the cavalry was able to more than make up for that. Let's see what did the damage for Angband, because this battle was from Death Eater's perspective. Yeah, the Uroloki 143 kills on good units, and I would say that it didn't get the most kills in terms of kill count, but because of the breaking it did, because of the key battles that it helped decide, I would say the Uroloki was definitely, as a single unit, the most important one. Also, the Balrogs and the Trolls, again, not a lot of kills, but the disruption they were causing meant that the split-shot arrows, even the regular archers, weren't able to be used as readily as Finarfin would have wanted. And that was very key as well. It was again, it's a messy job, but someone had to do it because that was ultimately what allowed the other units they had to move up without taking quite as much damage, especially from Feanor's perspective, because obviously the House of Feanor had by far the most units left at the end here, and ultimately allowed their cavalry to get in. Even then, their cavalry still took hits, but it wasn't saturating fire. It was an amount of damage that the armour and shields were able to deal with more comfortably, for a time anyway. The Guardian units, again, the Iron Crown units, again, very tough, very resilient, but also, as we can see here, very capable of dishing out damage as well. And considering the fact they took a bit of a beating from the Ballista early on, that's not a bad return on them. I think it was mostly against sort of like the Talath Dianin units, which is mostly sort of more basic stuff. But if you're able to kill off Elven units with even sort of higher end Orc ones for sort of 1v1, you probably take that in this sort of situation, especially considering the more defensive nature of the Finarfin roster overall. So yeah, that was a tournament battle. I've no idea at what stage of the tournament this was, but congratulations to the blue team for either advancing or outright winning the tournament. I don't know. But yeah, I think well played all round. I mean, it was a very close battle and it really could have gone either way. But I think as a showcase for Silmarillion, this does actually showcase very well, especially the factions that were involved here, because all of their strengths were very, very apparent. And obviously everyone will have picked out what they prefer out of the three that were on offer. Obviously in terms of more of a sort of light archer, ambushy sort of focus faction. Obviously the Elves of Assyriand are also a faction we've seen before in the game up to this point as well. But more on them in another replay, I'm sure. So yeah, big thank you to J Monster for sending this one over. Big thank you to all the players for being a part of this battle. And hopefully Silmarillion will be making a return to the channel again very soon. But the next replay from a Total War perspective that will be shown, we will of course be heading back to Reforged. And I have a few to pick from there. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.